In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. We fall in love with sprawling stories like The Lord of the Rings, the Star Wars saga, and the metaverses created by DC and Marvel because of the worlds their writers create. Robert McKean's epic tales have the same allure. With 481 characters and 25 set pieces, over 4 novels and 41 stories, Rob's sheer output of creativity is staggering. On August 30th, his newest novel, Mending What is Broken, hits bookstores, courtesy of Livingston Press. It's a bittersweet story about the families we make and we lose, about working-class towns and fading dreams, starring a flawed protagonist who manages to navigate it all, just as many of us struggle to cope with the real world that often feels like it's spinning out of control. Rob McKean, welcome to In Conversation.
Well, thank you. Well, that was a great introduction. I'm flattered to be here, Terry. I'm flattered to be one of your guests.
Give us the backstory on Mending What is Broken.
Mending What is Broken grew out of a short story, as all my novels have. The story was called The Teardown Party, and it's essentially the first chapter of the novel. And I wrote the story, it was published, and I thought I was done with it, but it wasn't done with me. As a writer, you must know this. Sometimes you just can't get rid of a story or a character. And for me, it was the main character. Peter Sangue Dolce was a character unlike I'd ever written before. He is a very big man. I mean, physically big. He's tall and he's overweight. Eating is part of the book. He eats too much. But he was a big man also in business, in a sense. He inherited a going concern from his father, a business. It wasn't a Fortune 50 company or anything, but it was a business that employed several hundred people and had a long legacy of decades behind it. They made clay pipe, sewer pipe. And Peter became his father's chief salesman and was a master salesman, which is a very, very important part of Peter's character. He was and is a salesman. And he's terrifically good at reading people and steering conversations. There's a great line, I'll probably butcher it, a great line from Pynchon, quote, "He had the instincts of a salesman. He knew how to steer a conversation along lines of least indifference." It's a beautiful quote. I have a little house of quotes, and that's one of them. Anyway, so Peter was a man of business. He walked among people with some influence. He's very smart. He's very perceptive. He's intuitive because he's a salesman. Salesmen are intuitive. They're good. So you would think he was, self-confident, assured. You'd say, where's the story in this fellow? But he's riven with self-doubt and remorse. He's lost his family's business. He's lost his second marriage. And he's now, as the book opens, he's threatened with the loss of the shared custody rights to his 10-year-old daughter, whom he adores. And he knows he's far too attached to her emotionally. He knows that. So here's this big man with a big profile, and yet inside of him is something smaller and cringing. Peter was too good to lose. I knew I had to do something with him, and I wasn't sure where we were going to go after this teardown story. I don't know, but I knew I had to go somewhere with it. So the background on the story is Peter has to, as you said very well, he has to navigate the losses that he's suffered. He has to navigate people around him who aren't always who we think they are. And he has to get through that. And he does, not without taking some hits.
How do you construct your stories?
I think in terms of 2 plots when I'm always writing. There's a plot, the external plot. Peter has to practically go to war with his ex-wife and so on. But Peter's got to go to war with himself. He's got to get unstuck. His lawyer, family lawyer, business lawyer who's known him all his life says, Peter, you got to give it up. You got to give up the idea that you can restart this business. You've got to sell the land it's on. You've got to sell the physical plant. You've got to move on. He's got that conflict inside him, which comes to the surface as he deals with people outside him. And that's where I find tension. I hope that strikes readers as real, because it seems to be that's close to what's happened in my life. I had to deal with things outside myself, as we all have. But I have had to deal like hell with the people inside me. They're all named Rob, but they're all different people. And so that's what I try to portray. That's what I'm trying to do in my fiction.
We are in conversation with Rob McKean, his forthcoming book, Mending What is Broken. Every story seems to have a path of its own that writers discover. How do you take often disparate puzzle pieces and put them together in a coherent way?
I have a wonderful quote. I have a friend who copy edited for me, who's a very, very good writer, by the way. And he likes my writing, obviously. But he wrote, after he sent the novel back with all his red marks, a lot of them, he said, I never could figure out where this novel was going next. And I wrote back, his name was Michael. I wrote back, Michael, I didn't always know that either until we got there. I do a lot of working out of my novels, the plot and the story and so on. I do a lot of that offline, call it offline. I go for walks. I do a lot of thinking when I walk. I do not take anything sounding in my ears. I think when I walk. And when I wake up early in the morning, I'm getting to that point in life where I don't sleep that well, so I'm awake early, sometimes 2 a.m., and so those are times to think. That's found time. Sometimes one would rather be sound asleep than wide awake. But anyway, you're wide awake, you're thinking. And so I worked it through. I knew what was going to happen about 10 minutes before Peter did, throughout the whole book. I worked it out kind of chapter by chapter. We got this far, now where do we go? And we got that far, where do we go? I had an end point sort of in mind. But I didn't know the route we were going to take.
Rob's website is Rob McKean, spelled McKean.com. And one of the resources there is a detailed gazetteer that lists the many characters, businesses, and locations in his stories. Rob, I've never seen that done before.
I put the gazetteer together because I was getting lost in my characters. Let me take a step back. All of my fiction takes place in one part of the world, Western Pennsylvania, steel mill company towns up and down the rivers. That's where I grew up. Town I grew up had one steel mill plant that employed 15,000 men and women at its peak and disappeared in the 1980s. My father worked in that steel mill. My grandfathers worked in that steel mill. I worked in that steel mill. And I had an aunt who worked in that steel mill in World War II, kind of running a forklift, Rosie the Riveter kind of person. That's what I write about. That's all I've written about all my life. I didn't start out specialized only in mill towns in Western Pennsylvania, but that's where I ended up writing. And I think of the town as a vast repertory company that I can just look into, and I can find, say, a side character in a story or a novel, and I can say, that might make a good main character. And suddenly now we have a main character who has his own or her own side characters, or a child, or even a grandchild. I have a family, two families of intermarried, and I've traced them through my stories now through 5 generations. I have this repertory company, as I call it. And for Peter, it was interesting to dip into that and find compatible people and not so compatible people that would conflict with him. I started because I was getting confused in my character. Who was that now? Like the two families of intermarried. I had to do a family tree of that. I got lost. Who's nephew of whom now? I kept saying. And then there'd be other characters. I'd say, how does he spell his name? I can't remember. So I put the gazetteer together, and it has over almost 500 names of characters. And I'll confess, it's woefully out of date. When I redo that, it's going to be well over 600 names. There's like 90 businesses, something like that. towns, organizations, and so on. And it mainly, again, was put together to help me. But then I realized, well, if it's helping me, it would certainly help other people as well. You know, if they cared to pursue it, you know, maybe a PhD student would pursue it that deeply. So I put it up, and the web person I had at the time said, God, this is going to be horrible to put up. You don't understand, Rob. Each one of these has to be a separate entity. And I said, well, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, but do it. To me, it was like putting a phone book together. These are all people I could phone. They're all imaginary, but they're not imaginary. Your characters aren't imaginary to you. I mean, they're just, these people are as real as anybody I sit beside on the subway.
We are in conversation with Robert McKean. Mending What is Broken appears in bookstores everywhere August 30th. Rob, how did you become a writer?
I love that question. On my father's side, they weren't writers. No, they weren't writers. But they were great storytellers. My grandmother just knew this town. She moved to this town as a young bride. And as the town began like a stage set. It was just thrown together around the 1900s for the steel mill. They built the housing plants. They brought in immigrants from all over the world. So there was my grandmother and her husband, and they turned up in this town. And so she knew so many people in this town and knew the sort of the political history and so on. She loved to tell stories. My father was a good storyteller, and my aunt, the Rosie the Riveter character, who just died 17 days short of 100. She just died just last month. Sweet woman. Anyway, she was a great storyteller, my aunt. So on that side, I just sat around dinner tables, celebrations or holidays, and they would start. They would just start telling stories, and they would bounce off each other. Well, that reminds me, or she was the daughter of. Do you remember who she was? She was the daughter of so and so. No, go another story. On my mother's side, they were very bookish. My grandfather, who worked in the mill, was a classical scholar. I didn't know him. I mean, I don't think I have any memories of him. But he read Greek and Latin. He studied in seminary, decided not to go into the ministry as his family had traditionally done. So he worked in the mill. But he was a scholar. And my aunt on that side, a school teacher, English teacher for over 40 years, a much beloved English teacher in the town. She was my English teacher, not in school, but in real life, she was my English teacher, as my brothers as well. We would take our papers to Aunt Belle after we got them back from our teacher, and Aunt Belle would go over them with us, word by word by word. And so the writing came from those two different directions. Now, my oldest brother went into business. He was a salesman. I credit him, in fact, in the acknowledgments for the book. I mean, some of the lore that Peter shares with us came directly from my brother, oldest brother. My middle brother was a mathematician. So it sort of fell to me, I thought, to be the writer in the family. I mean, somebody had to be the writer. Somebody had to write this down, this town, this amazing town, and all these stories. Somebody had to write this. So that was me.
Which came first, the novels or the short stories?
Well, here, I'll tell a story that I hope that any young writer who might be listening will listen to this story. I got out of graduate school, and I had been writing, through college and so on. But I said that when I got out of graduate school, I was going to write full time. I was going to be a serious writer. And of course, what was a serious writer going to do? A young man, he's going to write the great American novel. So I started in on a great American novel that featured a character a little bit like me. And because I kept changing, I was 22. I kept changing through my 20s. I had to keep changing the character. I had to keep changing the story. It grew to 600 or 700. I had lost track of manuscript pages, and it never got to the end because I didn't get to my end, and it collapsed. It fell apart. I mean, I quit writing for a while. I was so depressed. But before I quit for a little while to start a business. But anyway, when I put this failed novel down, I wrote in a year 5 stories or so. And I learned more about writing those 5 stories. This is true. The 9 years, that was 9 years I tried to write this sprawling novel. So anybody who wants to start should start with stories. because you can just write them in a month or a week or 2 months and then throw them away or go on to something else. You're not locked into something. So I said, I quit writing after the 5 stories and I started a business, but the writing came back. It came back, I didn't want it to come back. I actually resisted it. It came back. Then I only let it in on a short lease. I said, all right, I'll start writing again. But the minute I don't think this is going to work, the minute I'm bored, the minute I'm depressed, I'm quitting again. So the writing was put on short notice. And what happened was one of those 5 stories was the first chapter of a novel. And that's what brought the writing back. I kept thinking of that story, and I knew that story was never really concluded at the end of the story. And I said, that's got to be longer. Unfortunately, that book has never been published, and it breaks my heart. But anyway, I wrote that in 3 years, 4 years, I don't know. But unlike the 9 years spent on the novel, the sprawling first failed novel, unlike that entirely. So I want to say I started with novels, and that was wrong. What I really started with was short stories.
We are in conversation with Robert McKean. His short story collection, I'll Be Here For You, Diary of a Town, was awarded first prize in the Tarts First Fiction. His award-winning novel, The Catalog of Crooked Thoughts, was published in 2016. Mending What is Broken hits bookstores on August 30th. It was interesting to see a Shakespeare connection in this book, Rob. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Not everyone gets that, and nobody has to get it. It's not fundamental to understanding the book. But I love Shakespeare. Obviously, I love Shakespeare. And as I was writing Peter's story, one side of the story is in connection with his neighbor who is dying, who wants to be reunited with his daughter. The more I worked on that side of the story, it dawned on me, there's a lot of correspondence with Merchant of Venice. I didn't intend that, but the more I thought, there's lawyers, there's all sorts of, connections. And then part of what always bothers me about Merchant of Venice is the 5th act. It's a mistake. It's a giant mistake. I mean, Shakespeare is the greatest writer in the English language, no doubt, but he made a mistake on the 5th act. The 5th act just is a whole complete letdown. So as I was working on this, I realized, well, I'm writing a better 5th act than Shakespeare did. I just went with it. And in my early drafts, I did not draw any attention to it. I mean, I just figured that was between me and me. As my wife will say, that's between you and you, Rob, not me. But at some point I thought, I'm going to own this. So I put in the little epigraph, and I changed the names. Jacob's wife became Leah, which is the name of Shylock's deceased wife, and the daughter, Jessica. Oh, I don't know. It intrigued me. It pleased me, tickled me. And it's not doing any damage to the book. You don't need that for the book. So it's just there. It's there. And I love it.
How can readers and fans interact with Robert McKean?
I think the website, which is a great way to contact me. I mean, come right to me. And if it's something I can respond to, that I feel like I should respond to, then I would write directly through my own email out to that person.
Mending What is Broken is set for release on August 30th. Its author is our special guest, Robert McKean. You can learn more about him and connect with him at robmckean.com. Rob, thanks for a fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you. You got me going. I enjoyed it very much, Terry.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.